some stories don't sit comfortably in the past. They resist being filed away as dusty history, resisting the safety of distance. Instead, they reach forward, pressing cold fingers against the present, making us question whether certain secrets were ever meant to be unearthed. In the fall of 1971, in a rural corner of Virginia's Appalachian foothills, a 17-year-old girl arrived at Mercy General Hospital under circumstances that baffled every single witness. Her name was Sarah Mae Whitaker. Thin as a wisp, carried in by her family on a makeshift stretcher, she looked more like a child than a mother-to-be. But her body told a different story, a belly grotesquely distended, veins snaking across the taut skin. A faint rippling beneath as though something inside shifted with a will of its own. By the end of that day, the hospital would deliver a child that 3 medical professionals refused to acknowledge. One walked out, another suffered a breakdown. The third never practiced medicine again. And when investigators tried to document what happened, the files were seized, locked away by federal authorities and marked classified for the next half-century. This wasn't simply the story of a tragic pregnancy or a child born with devastating birth defects. It was something more, something orchestrated. Behind Sarah Mae's condition was a multi-generational breeding program, rooted in secrecy and carried out by one family, the Whitakers. Hidden deep in the Appalachian wilderness, this family pursued a vision that defied natural law and horrified those who glimpsed it. What exactly happened inside Mercy General that fog-shrouded October morning? Why did a local lineage, nearly invisible to the outside world, command such attention from federal agents? And why, even now, does the Whitaker name conjure unease in the mountain communities where their legacy still lingers? Tonight, we begin with the Whitaker case, peeling back layers of disturbing medical records, faded genealogy charts, and whispers passed down like curses. But we will also leave space for you, the listener, to weigh in. Do you think some histories are too dangerous to revisit? Or is it our responsibility to bring such buried truths into the light? Let me know in the comments. And if stories like this pull you in, subscribe for more deep dive documentaries. Your engagement ensures stories like this one aren't erased or forgotten. The morning it began. October 13th, 1971 started as an ordinary day at Mercy General Hospital. A modest, understaffed facility, it served a scattered rural population in Virginia's mountainous backcountry. The nurses were already tired, charting vitals, refilling coffee, and preparing for another long day of routine illnesses and expectant mothers. That quiet was broken when the front doors flew open. A cluster of grim-faced men and women shuffled in, their boots caked with mud, their clothes smelling faintly of smoke and earth. Between them, they carried a girl on a crude wooden frame, a quilt draped over her body. She was unconscious, her arms limp at her sides, her face pale against the fabric. When the quilt fell away, the staff gasped. Her abdomen stretched outward in a grotesque dome, skin so tight it seemed ready to split. Veins glowed blue beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The nurses swore they saw her stomach ripple in strange, rhythmic waves, as though something beneath her flesh shifted with deliberate intention. Dr. Margaret Powell, the hospital's senior obstetrician, arrived within minutes. Calm, seasoned, and deeply respected, Powell had delivered thousands of babies in her career. She thought she had seen everything: breech births, ruptured uteruses, stillborn twins, even a case of conjoined infants. But the moment she laid eyes on Sarah Mae, a sensation colder than fear stopped her. The girl's pulse was erratic, her breathing shallow, her temperature plummeting. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a brief instant she opened her eyes. They were amber, not hazel or brown, but a pale yellow that caught the light in a way that unsettled Powell deeply. Behind the girl, her family clustered silently against the wall. They did not cry, nor pray, nor ask frantic questions like most families in delivery wards. They murmured to one another in low voices, in a dialect the staff could not recognize. And their expressions, strangely calm, even expectant, made the doctors uneasy. At last, one man stepped forward. He was tall, weathered, his face carved by decades of mountain hardship. Later, records would identify him as Sarah Mae's father. He locked eyes with Dr. Powell and said softly, "We are here for the culmination." The word chilled her to her core. A birth unlike any other. As nurses wheeled Sarah May toward the delivery suite, a strange hush fell over the hospital. The fog outside pressed against the windows, gray and heavy, muting the world beyond. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed and monitors beeped. A sense of inevitability hung in the air. As though everyone knew they were stepping into something bigger than themselves, Powell assembled extra staff. She wanted every hand she could summon, not just nurses but other physicians, even orderlies. Something told her this delivery would not be routine. And she was right. The first contractions arrived in violent waves, but Sarah May's body didn't respond like any patient Powell had ever seen. Her abdomen convulsed in ways that defied the mechanics of childbirth. At moments, it seemed almost as though the muscles beneath her skin worked independently, fighting against the rhythm of labor. The fetal monitor produced erratic readings. Sometimes the device spiked wildly, then flatlined as though no heartbeat existed. Then, inexplicably, the sound would return, steady, strong, and far too rapid for a human infant. At one point, a nurse swore she felt movement pressing against her palm, not just from inside Sarah May's womb, but higher, near the ribcage, as though something living squirmed in places it should not exist. Powell tried to focus on the mechanics, keep the mother alive, stabilize the vitals, prepare for delivery. But every rational instinct collided with a dread she could not shake. This was not a complication. This was something entirely outside medicine. The family, still clustered in the corner, never flinched. Their faces were alight with anticipation, as though they were not watching a tragedy unfold, but witnessing the fulfillment of some prophecy. Hours passed. Sweat poured down Powell's back as she worked. Nurses exchanged glances filled with unspoken terror. Finally, when the moment of delivery arrived, something emerged that broke them. To this day, the surviving staff refused to describe what they saw. Hospital records end abruptly, with half-finished sentences scratched in ink, pages missing, entire files later seized by government agents. What's certain is this: 3 professionals walked out, one never returned to medicine, and Sarah May Whitaker, just 17 years old, did not survive the ordeal. The whispered lineage. The Whitaker name was not unfamiliar in Roanoke County. For generations, locals had whispered about them in tones of unease. They were known, but not known. Spotted rarely in town, trading occasionally at the general store, paying in cash. Their farm lay deep in the mountains, nearly inaccessible except by footpath. Children were warned not to wander near the old Whitaker land. The story began over a century earlier, in 1847, when a man named Joshua Whitaker laid claim to 200 acres of rocky, unforgiving mountain land. No one else had wanted it. The soil was barren, the winters brutal, and the nearest trading post was days away. But Joshua wasn't searching for prosperity. He was searching for seclusion. With him were 2 women, Martha, his legal wife, and Rebecca, her younger sister. Local clergy, eager for any congregant, blessed both unions, ignoring moral and legal conventions. By 1855, Joshua had fathered 14 children between the 2 sisters. He preached a philosophy that outsiders called dangerous, even delusional. To Joshua, mixing bloodlines diluted what he referred to as the divine essence. He believed the Whitakers were chosen, tasked with preserving purity at any cost. His children absorbed this belief, shaping the lineage for more than a century. What began as whispers of eccentricity hardened into something darker, a breeding program. Generation after generation, designed to keep the bloodline closed, pure, and separate from the outside world. By the 20th century, the Whitakers had become nearly invisible. Marriages took place within the family. Children bore the unmistakable signs of close kinship. And yet, within their own community, the Whitakers viewed themselves not as diminished, but as elevated, the guardians of Joshua's divine mandate. A case that would not disappear by the 1960s. Rumors about the Whitakers had reached local authorities, though little could be proven. Social workers filed incomplete reports. Teachers whispered about withdrawn children who vanished from classrooms. But the family remained isolated, protected by geography and secrecy. Then, in 1971, Sarah May arrived at Mercy General. And with her, the hidden history of the Whitakers exploded into public consciousness. only to be buried again by government classification. Why were federal agents so quick to seize the files? What did they see in the delivery records that demanded secrecy? And why has the case remained in shadows for 50 years? As we continue, we'll trace the roots of the Whitaker family deeper, from Joshua's first settlement through the hidden rituals and disturbing genealogies that shaped Sarah May's final moments. And we'll confront the lingering question: how many more secrets lie sealed in the mountains of Appalachia, waiting for the wrong set of eyes to uncover them? The death of Sarah May Whitaker should have marked an end, a tragic close to a disturbing chapter. Instead, it became the beginning of a secret that refused to stay buried. Within hours of her passing, strangers arrived at Mercy General. Not grieving relatives, not local clergy, but men in dark suits carrying briefcases and clipped authority. They spoke little to the hospital staff. Their badges flashed quickly, their instructions curt. All records, samples, and notes from the case were to be surrendered. Every scrap of paper, every x-ray plate, every fetal monitor strip was boxed and sealed. What couldn't be taken was destroyed. Dr. Powell, shaken but defiant, tried to resist. She argued the medical necessity of keeping charts, the ethical obligation to record. One agent leaned close and told her plainly, "Doctor, what you saw here tonight never happened. And for the good of this country, you'll forget it." By the next morning, the official cause of death listed for Sarah May was complications of pregnancy. The child, if it lived even briefly, was not recorded in any public document. Yet whispers spread quickly through the county. The staff couldn't unsee what they had witnessed. And in mountain towns where rumor moved faster than truth, the story of Sarah May became folklore almost overnight. The Whitaker legacy. To understand why the federal government might care about one family's secrets, we need to return to the legacy of Joshua Whitaker and the ideology he seeded in his descendants. Joshua had carved his empire not from fertile land or wealth, but from isolation. His children grew up with a single commandment: outsiders corrupt, insiders preserve. By the second generation, Whitaker marriages were already confined to cousins and siblings. By the third, the lines had blurred so completely that family trees looped back on themselves like a snake devouring its own tail. The results were plain. Locals spoke of Whitaker children who rarely spoke in public, who stared too long, who carried features that seemed slightly askew. Some were bright, others profoundly impaired. But among themselves, the Whitakers continued their tradition, believing it strengthened their essence, even as outsiders recoiled. By the mid-20th century, whispers turned darker. Hunters passing through remote trails claimed to see figures watching from the tree line, pale and silent. A mail carrier once reported being followed for miles by barefoot men who never broke stride. For most, these were stories, strange but harmless. Until Sarah May, the classified files, what exactly was in those confiscated records, we may never know. But fragments leaked years later suggest the child delivered in 1971 was not simply malformed. Its anatomy defied classification, combining human features with irregularities so profound they could not be catalogued as defect alone. For government agencies during the Cold War era, such anomalies triggered alarm. Genetic abnormalities, especially within isolated populations, raised questions about experimentation, mutation, and even potential public health risks. Whether the Whitakers were investigated for science, secrecy, or superstition remains unclear. What is certain is this: the Whitaker name was sealed inside locked cabinets in Washington, and for decades, no outsider dared speak of them openly. When the government sealed away the Whitaker files in 1971, officials may have believed they were containing a local tragedy, erasing it from the record before it could fester into scandal. But history has a way of clawing back to the surface, especially when a community's unease refuses to quiet. For the people of Roanoke County, the Whitakers were not an abstract curiosity locked away in filing cabinets. They were real, they were near, and they had lived among the Appalachian ridges for more than a century. Sarah May's death did not erase them, it intensified the shadows around them. In the years that followed, encounters, sightings, and fragments of oral history would pile into a disturbing mosaic. To piece together the Whitaker story, One must sift through these shards, testimony from neighbors, genealogical records smuggled out of courthouses, and chilling interviews conducted in whispers. Life beyond the ridges. The Whitakers lived on a tract of land nearly unreachable by vehicle. Dirt paths twisted through dense thickets, narrowing into trails where horses hesitated and wagons broke. Locals called it the Hollow, though no map bore that name. The hollow contained a cluster of cabins, crude log structures patched with tin and tar paper, smoke curling from makeshift chimneys. Generations had been born and buried there, often without leaving. Census takers, when they came at all, recorded vague numbers, 10, 20, sometimes 30 individuals. The truth was fluid, hidden behind the family's own insularity. Neighbors described the Whitakers as ghost-like presences in town. A man might appear once a month at the general store, eyes averted, speaking in a dialect that blended archaic English with Appalachian slang. He would purchase staples, flour, salt, lamp oil, tobacco, always in cash, always in silence. Then he would vanish back into the mountains. Children were occasionally glimpsed but rarely spoken to. Teachers remembered pupils who arrived barefoot, unwashed, and withdrawn. They often left school suddenly, never to return. They weren't unkind, one retired teacher recalled decades later, but there was something watchful in them. Like they knew a secret the rest of us couldn't understand. Genealogies and Ashes curious researchers who later tried to trace the Whitaker line found only fragments. Early courthouse fires destroyed records conveniently, whether by accident or intent, no one could say. What remained painted a picture of a family tree that wound inward rather than outward. Joshua Whitaker's 14 children intermarried, cousins wed cousins, siblings paired with siblings. By the turn of the 20th century, the Whitaker bloodline was already looping in on itself. Names repeated, Isaac, Rebecca, Martha, Joshua, over and over, generation after generation. Physical consequences appeared. Accounts described children with elongated jaws, sloping foreheads, and amber-colored eyes reminiscent of Sarah May's. Some were fertile, others sterile, some spoke fluently. Others never spoke at all. Yet within the family, these traits were not considered defects but markers of purity. They were, in Whitaker eyes, proof that Joshua's mandate lived on. A half-burned family Bible discovered in the 1980s bore a chilling inscription on its inside cover. The line must hold. The line must not bend. The line is the covenant. The handwriting, shaky but deliberate, was signed only, J. Wuju. Encounters in the Hollow. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, hunters, hikers, and the occasional lost traveler brought back unsettling stories from the ridges surrounding the hollow. One man recalled stumbling upon a clearing at dusk, where half a dozen figures stood in a circle, their hands clasped. They were humming, not singing words, but droning a low, guttural tone. When the man's dog barked, the figures turned in unison. Their faces pale in the twilight, their amber eyes glinting. He fled without looking back. Another tale came from a mail carrier whose route skirted the mountain roads. He noticed barefoot tracks, dozens of them, pressed into the mud along the ditches. The prints appeared overnight, stretching for miles, as though an entire group had moved silently through the dark. When he mentioned it at the post office, an older clerk muttered, "Whitakers, don't ask questions you don't want answered." Most disturbing was an account from a nurse aide who had been on duty the night of Sarah May's death. She left Roanoke County within a year, unable to bear the silence. Decades later, in a taped interview, she confessed, "I've never spoken of this, but I swear, after they took the body away, I saw the family in the parking lot. They weren't mourning, they were smiling." The father, the same man who said culmination, he looked right at me and said, "One generation closes. Another opens. I think about that every night." What did he mean? Who came after her? Persistence of secrecy. Federal involvement did not end in 1971. In 1973, census workers were advised not to enter the hollow without escort. By 1975, social services quietly dropped inquiries into child welfare cases linked to the Whitakers. Local law enforcement received quiet directives to avoid unnecessary escalation. The files remained sealed, but whispers grew. Why protect this family? Why erase the medical evidence of Sarah May's child? Was the government hiding a biological anomaly? or simply shielding themselves from the scandal of a family whose practices had spiraled into the grotesque, conspiracy theories flourished. Some suggested the Whitakers were the subject of genetic experimentation, their isolation used as a cover for clandestine programs. Others argued the family carried a rare mutation, one valuable to research but too horrifying to reveal. The simplest explanation, that they were merely victims of inbreeding, seemed inadequate to account for the speed with which officials intervened. The amber eyes one detail surfaces again and again in testimony, the eyes. Sarah May's irises, described by Dr. Powell as pale amber, were not unique. Multiple witnesses across generations recall Whitaker family members with eyes the color of honey, gold, or even molten brass. In dim light, they seemed to glow. To outsiders, the amber eyes became shorthand for the family itself, a mark of their difference. To the Whitakers, it was likely revered as a sign of chosen blood. The detail is unsettling not because it is impossible. Rare genetic mutations can indeed produce unusual eye shades, but because it appears with such consistency across accounts, spanning more than a century. In Appalachian folklore, golden eyes sometimes appear as symbols of second sight, of those who can see beyond the veil of ordinary life. Whether the Whitakers embraced this belief is unknown, but the persistence of the trait lends credence to the possibility that Sarah May was not an aberration, but the latest manifestation of something her family had long cultivated. Beyond 1971, the Whitakers did not vanish after Sarah May's death. They retreated further into the hollow, avoiding hospitals, schools, and census takers. Yet sightings continued well into the 1990s. A state trooper once reported seeing a line of figures walking single file along a ridge at dawn, their clothes threadbare, their gait uneven. He stopped his car, but when he climbed the slope, the ridge was empty. Journalists attempted exposes but found their access cut short. One reporter from Richmond drove into the mountains in 1984, intent on reaching the hollow. He returned shaken, refusing to publish his notes. "There are things you don't disturb," he said cryptically. By the turn of the millennium, the Whitakers had become both ghost story and urban legend. Teenagers dared one another to drive near the hollow at night. Hunters carried rifles not only for deer, but in case a Whitaker comes calling. And through it all, the family endured, shrouded in secrecy. Why it matters, why should we care about one family's hidden history? Why should we revisit a story the government worked so hard to suppress? The answer lies not in sensationalism, but in understanding the human consequences of secrecy. The Whitakers were not monsters. They were people shaped by isolation, bound by ideology, and twisted by choices made generations before they were born. Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about heredity, community neglect, and the line between preservation and destruction. But beyond sociology and science, there remains a deeper unease that the Whitakers guarded not just a bloodline, but a belief. And that belief, carried through amber eyes and whispered rituals, did not die with Sarah May. In our next and final part, we'll return to the hollow in the present day. We'll examine modern encounters, leaked photographs, and the haunting possibility that the Whitaker lineage continues even now, hidden in the Appalachian ridges. What was once classified may finally demand to be seen. Half a century has passed since Sarah May Whitaker was carried into Mercy General Hospital. The staff who witnessed that night are mostly gone, their testimonies scattered in fragments. Yet the story refuses to fade. In mountain towns, at kitchen tables, and whispered warnings to children, the Whitaker name still circulates. The hollow remains. Satellite images show the faint outlines of cabins, their roofs sagging, hidden beneath the tree canopy. Smoke still rises from chimneys in winter. Locals swear that lights can be seen moving along the ridges, lanterns swaying in single-file lines, just as they were decades ago. So the question remains, what became of the Whitakers after 1971? Modern sightings. Over the years, hikers and wanderers have continued to bring back unsettling accounts. A pair of college students, camping in the Blue Ridge foothills in 2003, reported waking to find barefoot prints surrounding their tent. The tracks were small, like children, one said, but there were dozens. And they circled us completely. In 2011, a bow hunter claimed to spot a gaunt man watching him from the tree line. The hunter raised his binoculars and swore he saw amber eyes glinting before the figure melted back into the woods. "It wasn't a trick of light," he told a game warden later. "Those eyes were gold." A more recent account comes from a social worker who, in 2018, tried to track a missing child case in Roanoke County. She was told politely but firmly by local law enforcement, "Don't go up the hollow. Whatever's up there isn't your concern." Leaked photographs in 2020, grainy images surfaced online, claimed to be taken by urban explorers who trespassed near the hollow. They show a collapsed barn, a rusted swing set, and in the corner of one frame, 3 blurred figures. Barefoot, pale, and thin, their heads turned toward the camera. One appears to be a young girl clutching a rag doll. The uploader's account vanished within weeks, leaving speculation but no answers. Whether authentic or hoax, the photographs reignited interest in the Whitakers. Were they still there, cut off from the world, their lineage continuing in secret? Or had their image simply become fodder for digital campfire stories? The persistence of secrecy despite modern technology, the hollow resists intrusion. GPS falters in its ridges, cell service dies in the valleys, and locals, even those who scoff at the legend, caution outsiders against wandering too far. The mountains keep their secrets, an old farmer told a reporter in 2019, and some secrets keep themselves. What's striking is how little official record exists even today. No death certificates beyond the 1970s, no census entries, no property deeds in public databases. It's as if the Whitakers were quietly erased, their land forgotten by the state, their presence unacknowledged by design. Why the story endures. What keeps the Whitaker story alive is not just fear, it's fascination. The idea of a family living beyond law, science, and time speaks to something primal in us. It forces us to consider how thin the line is between civilization and isolation, between survival and distortion. But there's also the darker allure that somewhere deep in the Appalachian ridges, a lineage still endures, carrying eyes of pale amber and a belief in purity that outlasted centuries. If true, then Sarah May's death in 1971 was not an end at all, but merely a chapter in a story still unfolding. The final question: so what are we left with? A classified case, a vanished file, a lineage whispered about but never confirmed, and the knowledge that one autumn morning in 1971, doctors at Mercy General bore witness to something so unsettling that half a century later, it still refuses to let us go. Perhaps the truth is buried forever in government archives. Perhaps it lingers in the hollow, passed down in blood and ritual. Or perhaps it lives only in the uneasy stories of those who swear they saw golden eyes watching from the dark. Whatever the truth, the Whitaker case reminds us of one thing: history is not always neat. Sometimes it is jagged, raw, and unfinished, a trespass into places we were never meant to go. And now that trespass belongs to you. What do you think? Were the Whitakers victims of circumstance or architects of their own chilling fate? Were federal agents protecting the family or protecting the public from what they had become? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this intrigue you, subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten, the forbidden, and the classified. Because as long as secrets remain hidden, we will keep digging. Thank you for watching. Stories like the Whitaker case remind us how easily truth can be buried and how dangerous silence can be. If this deep dive kept you thinking long after the screen went dark, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more hidden histories, and share your thoughts below. Your engagement keeps these forgotten stories alive and ensures they're never buried again. Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious.